Today, I'm going to be working on this Mantua Union Pacific GP20. This is a model that needs a lot of work, and I've got a new technique I want to try on this thing, so let's get started. First of all, we need to test this unit out. I have it set up on the outer loop of my test track hooked up to this controller, so I'll give it some power and we'll see what it does. Last I remember, I think it lights up, but I don't think the motor turns over. I heard a hum for a second, which sounded like the motor was on, but now the headlight's on and I hear nothing. I'll wiggle this thing around a little bit. And now it appears that we're getting a short circuit, so I don't know if it's a wiring issue or if it's something going on with the motor, but this unit for sure needs a deep dive and we need to figure out what's wrong with it. Before we tear everything down though, let's take a little bit of a walk around this locomotive. And for those curious, this locomotive came in a pretty large lot of locomotives off of eBay a few months back. Taking a look at this locomotive, you can tell pretty clearly that it's not in great shape. The first thing you might notice is this model is pretty filthy. There's a ton of dust all around the walkways, on the roof of the locomotive, on the walkways here, and it's just kind of coated in a layer of filth. So once we get all the components out of the shell, I'm going to take the shell and give it a good bath. We also have a lot of detail damage and whatnot around this unit. Up front, we're missing both of the truck covers, although we have them in the rear. On this side, we have this full set of handrails. However, we don't have any on the front. And on this side, we only have one stanchion, and the actual wire for the handrails is warped quite severely. And in addition, there's no handrails on the back. Up top, though, we are missing the bell. We do have the horns, which is quite nice. And other than that, the model appears to be intact. We've got all the steps, we've got all the pilot details, we've even got both couplers. Aside from all the filth, the paint is actually in pretty good shape for one of these Mantua units. I only really noticed two real defects. We've got a little defect here where a handrail wire once existed, and clearly it rubbed some of the paint off. And up front, the decal here seems to be fading just a little bit. Again, this unit's not in perfect shape, so I'm not going to complain that much. And the painting and lettering is just typical for a Mantua. You've got some fuzzy lines, and it doesn't look the greatest, but that's how these things just kind of came from the factory. Flipping this thing over, there's really nothing out of the ordinary. I already mentioned the missing truck covers here. We do actually have horn hook couplers on both ends. Sometimes the ones on either the front or the rear can get broken off on these old Mantua units, but it's kind of nice to see that we have both of them. There seems to be nothing weird going on down here. The weight, the screws down here, the rear truck, the front truck, all that actually seems to be in pretty good shape. It is worth noting that this is held together by rivets. That's where the new technique I have comes in handy that I want to experiment with, but we'll get to that in a bit. So, with the walk around complete, it's time to get all the components out of the shell of this locomotive. And really all we have in here is the front power truck, the rear dummy truck, and we have the weight. The weight is held in by two screws. The front truck is held in by these two clips, one on each side. And then the rear truck here, I believe, is held in by three clips. We have two that are right behind the fuel tank, and we've got one on the back of the unit right there. So I'll get my engine cradle over here, and we'll get to work on that. Now the locomotive has been torn down. We've got the weight, both these trucks, and the shell separated into their various components. First, I'm going to take the shell over and give it a good cleanup. I was not able to get the handrails off. I may have been able to use a little bit more force to try and get them off, but I really didn't want to break or damage anything, so I'm just going to leave them on there. I don't really care about getting all the dirt off this thing. It just needs to be better. And you may have noticed there was something interesting going on with the two of these, and we'll talk about that once I'm back from cleaning off that shell. Now I've got that shell cleaned up and I got the weight out of our way so we can move our attention to just these two trucks. And I think I know exactly why we were having either a condition where only the headlight was on or we were getting a short circuit. And that issue is this one little wire right here, which is supposed to be soldered to this post here. What this wire being broken is obviously going to do is make the model not start, but I can tell you exactly why we'd have the headlight on or why this thing would be shorting out. The headlight remained operable simply because of how the lighting on these Mantua units is designed. On the front truck here, to get power to this side of the light bulb, we have a wire that's just directly connected underneath that little screw right here. And then coming out of the rear, we have this one little jumper. This piece screws on to the light right here when it's screwed into the model, and then this wire continues on and goes to this post right here. So this wire would not be reaching the motor, but electricity would still be flowing through this light bulb and powering the headlight, which would explain why the light was on and we heard nothing from the unit. And I think the short circuit was just a cause of this wire moving around, because if the wire touches either this brush right here, this piece here, or anything around the casing of the motor, it's going to cause a short as it's all picking up power from the opposite rail. So this one wire is our issue, and I'm not going to address it yet because I want to deal with cleaning out both of these trucks first. And if they're disconnected, it'll make our job easier when we try out my new technique on this front truck. The front truck will have to wait a couple minutes though, because I'll be starting with the rear assembly. There's just a few simple things I want to do to this. I want to clean up everything in here with a little bit of rubbing alcohol, including the wheels. When we get to these brass ones here, I'm going to use my fiberglass pencil. And then when that's all said and done, I'll just use some Labelle 107 on all four of the bearings here. It should be pretty quick and simple, and I just want to get this little piece out of our way. Now that all that work on the dummy assembly has been completed, it's time to move on to the front power truck, and here we get to use my new technique. In the past, what I did to get these Mantua units with rivets apart enough to be serviced is just pry off these two wheels with traction tires. I forgot to mention it, but these traction tires are actually in pretty good shape. But that's really not the best way to clean these things up. You can't get to everything, it's pretty difficult to lubricate some stuff, and it's just not the best way to do it. So I went out and bought some hardware, and I have a plan as to how we're going to go about this. And here is what I bought. I got some 256 nuts, and I also got some 7/8 of an inch long 256 screws, and I'll explain why in just a second. But for reference, let me get a 3/4 of an inch 256 screw, and I'll kind of demonstrate. I've pulled out the 3/4 of an inch screw, and I also have pulled out another spare Mantua drive, which was actually the first piece I experimented with this on, and this will kind of show you exactly what I plan on doing. I'm not going to tap directly into here. Instead, what I'm going to do is put the 256 all the way through, and I'm going to hold it in place with the nut at the top, and the nut actually needs to be here because it serves the purpose of holding this plate in up here. If not, this top piece would not be attached to the locomotive, and essentially it would kind of be useless. I had to choose the odd size of being 7/8 inch long, just because a 3/4 inch screw like I have right here is just barely too short, at least in my eyes. I just kind of mocked it up like so, and I think you can tell it's not going to be short enough to screw into the nut up there. And I just didn't want to try and jerry rig something up to make it work, and instead I went out and bought some new hardware that should do the job just fine. Before that new hardware can be installed, we have to get these rivets out so we can clean everything up, give the truck some fresh oil, and then put it all back together. And to do that, I'm going to employ the help of my new rotary tool here. I've used this on many occasions, and while it's not the most powerful tool for the job, I want to experiment with it. I do have a more powerful power drill and even a full-on drill press I can use, but just for fun I want to see what this can do since it doesn't have that much torque, and I want to see if it can deal with a smaller drilling task like this, or if it'll be way too much for this tool. It's about a minute or so later, and I've immediately had to make a change. I decided that the rotary tool isn't going to work. I kept trying to get my drill bit to go into the chuck of the tool, and it kept uncentering, so clearly the rotary tool doesn't like drill bits this large, and it also bit me while I was trying to tighten it. So I'm done with that for now, and we put it in a more typical type of power drill, and we're going to use that to drill out these rivets. We've removed enough material that now we can just kind of take this plate straight off, and we should be able to get these little axles right here out. I may have to pry these bits off next, but we'll do that, and then I'll come back once these are off, and we will use a hammer and a little bit of a tool to get these rivets fully out of here. Despite the objections of this locomotive, I'm going to continue on, and now we can clean everything in here with some rubbing alcohol, and in the cases of the commutator and these brass wheels, a fiberglass pencil. Everything in here is kind of dirty, so it's going to use a good cleanup. You can see the worm gears here, the commutator here, both sets of wheels right here, the little pickup guys right here, and then the truck cover especially are all in need of a very good cleaning. Now everything's been very thoroughly cleaned, and it's time to use some Lebel 107 on the irregular gears and some Lebel 106 on the worm gears, just to get everything lubricated, and then we can put it all back together with our new hardware. Now that everything's back together, I just want to make sure this starts. I got some power put in my controller, and we got 2 test leads here, so let's see if anything happens. And that is for sure springing straight to life. Now this means that all I really have left to do is to tin this one wire here and solder it right back onto that post there, and this unit should be good to go. These 2 units are now firmly wired up. I had to cut the clip because I wasn't having any luck with this wire here, and then as soon as I cut the clip, I went to solder it on, and it went on perfectly. So I don't know what this is with this engine and not wanting to be filmed, but we're moving on anyway. Everything should be good, and now it's time to put all these pieces back into the shell of the locomotive. And if anyone was curious, here's the shell now that it's cleaned up. It's a lot less filthy. It's still not in perfect condition, but I personally think it looks a lot better now. I also chose to install the light off camera because, once again, that was putting up a fight on camera. I had probably a 10-minute clip of just trying to get that light in there. I shut off the camera, and then literally a minute later, it went into place. So I don't know what's going on with this engine. Clearly, it doesn't want to be filmed, but we're going to finish this up anyway. Now the Angry GP20 is all reassembled. Let's test it out and see if it'll actually start. Now the Angry GP20 is set up on the track and it's time to test it out. Given how angry it's been this entire process, I don't really have high hopes that it'll start, but I'll put some power in the track and we will see what it does. And clearly it sprung straight to life. Let's throw this unit in reverse. And while this unit needs to break in a little bit still, I think that is a very, very good result given all the suffering we went through. So now this rebellious GP20 runs once again. It's not in perfect condition, but it seems to run pretty well, and I think with a good break-in, that can be even better. So even though it was quite a bit of suffering, I'm glad we finally got this unit repaired, and I'm pretty happy with how my technique turned out. If any of you do have any feedback on this, please do let me know. I'd love to hear it. But I think this is a huge game changer when it comes to working on Mantua units with rivets like these, even though I don't have any more lined up to work on.